Right now, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, a United States Air Force B-52H Stratofortress is flying east toward England, fully armed and ready for war, and that single fact should tell you everything you need to know about how seriously America is taking the situation in the Persian Gulf. Serious. What you are about to hear is the full operational breakdown of how the United States military launched heavy bomber strikes against Iranian missile positions. And I mean full breakdown, from the moment the mechanics cracked open the engine cowlings at a British airbase to the second those 2,000-pound bombs hit concrete bunkers on the other side of the world. Pause. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is what happened when America decided that the Strait of Hormuz was going to stay open, no matter what Tehran had to say about it. So let us start at the beginning, at a place most Americans have never heard of, but one that plays a massive role in how the United States projects military power across the globe. Royal Air Force Station Fairford sits in the English countryside in Gloucestershire, and on any normal day it is a quiet place. Green fields, old runways, the kind of base that looks like it belongs in a World War II documentary. But Fairford is not a museum. It is one of the most important forward staging bases the United States Air Force has in Europe. And when things get serious in the Middle East or anywhere east of the Atlantic, Fairford wakes up fast. And that is exactly what happened. On March 20th, the British government officially approved the use of British-based American military facilities for combat operations. That approval covered Fairford, and it also covered Diego Garcia, the remote island base in the Indian Ocean that the United States uses for long-range strike missions. The moment that approval came through, Fairford transformed from a quiet forward operating location into a full-scale combat launch point, and the aircraft sitting on its ramp were about to earn their reputation as the most destructive conventional bombers on the planet. The B-52H Stratofortress is not new. Let us be honest about that. This aircraft first flew in the 1960s, and some of the airframes in service today are older than the grandparents of the people flying them. But age means nothing when you understand what this machine can do. The B-52H is powered by 8 Pratt & Whitney TF-33 turbofan engines, 4 under each wing in twin pods, and together, those engines push this enormous aircraft through the sky at high subsonic speeds across distances that would take a fighter jet 2 or 3 refueling stops to cover. The bomber can carry up to 70,000 pounds of weapons. That is 35 tons of destruction loaded inside its bomb bay and on its wing pylons, and that payload can include everything from unguided iron bombs to satellite-guided precision munitions to cruise missiles that can fly hundreds of miles on their own and hit a target the size of a parking space. There is no other aircraft in the American inventory that combines this kind of range, this kind of payload, and this kind of flexibility. The B-2 Spirit is stealthier, the B-1B Lancer is faster, but the B-52 can carry more weapons farther and loiter over a battlefield longer than either of them. And when the mission calls for putting the maximum amount of firepower on a set of fixed targets at extended range, the B-52 is the aircraft you send. So the mechanics at Fairford went to work. These are not guys who rush. Every step is deliberate and documented because a single mistake on the ground can mean a mission failure, or worse at 40,000 feet. They started with the engines, opening the cowling panels on each of the 8 power plants and inspecting the turbine blades one by one. They were looking for cracks, chips, anything that might indicate fatigue or foreign object damage. A cracked turbine blade at full power can shatter and send fragments through the engine casing. And on a bomber carrying tens of thousands of pounds of live explosives, that is not a situation anyone wants to deal with. Once the engines passed inspection, the ground crews moved to the weapons loading. This is where things get heavy, literally. The primary munitions for this mission were Mark 84 general-purpose bombs, each one weighing 2,000 pounds and measuring about 12 feet in length. The Mark 84 is the backbone of American air-delivered firepower. It is a simple weapon in concept, a steel casing packed with nearly 950 pounds of high explosive. But when you drop it from altitude with a guidance kit attached, it becomes a precision instrument of destruction, capable of penetrating reinforced concrete and collapsing underground structures. Alongside the Mark 84s, the cruise-loaded AGM-86 Charlie Conventional Air launched cruise missiles. These are standoff weapons, meaning the bomber does not have to fly directly over the target to use them. Each cruise missile weighs approximately 3,150 pounds, carries its own guidance system, and can strike hardened targets from a range of over 600 miles. That means a B-52 can launch these missiles while still cruising over international waters or friendly airspace, and hit a bunker deep inside enemy territory without ever entering the range of most air defense systems. The third type of weapon loaded was the GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack munition, known in the military simply as JDAM. The JDAM is a guidance kit that bolts onto a standard Mark 84 bomb and turns it into a GPS-guided smart weapon. Once released, the JDAM adjusts its fins to steer toward a set of pre-programmed coordinates, and it can hit within a few meters of its aim point regardless of weather, darkness, or smoke. For striking missile storage bunkers where precision matters more than blast radius, the JDAM is the weapon of choice. The ground crews used MJ-1 jammer trucks to move the munitions into position beneath the aircraft. These are hydraulic loading vehicles designed specifically for handling heavy bombs and missiles. The crew drove the jammer under the aircraft, positioned the weapon on the lift platform, raised it into place, and locked it onto the mounting hardware. For the wing pylons, each weapon was hoisted individually and secured to the external hardpoints. For the internal bomb bay, the weapons were loaded onto the Common Strategic Rotary Launcher, which is the beating heart of the B-52's weapons delivery system. The rotary launcher is a cylindrical drum that sits inside the bomb bay and holds up to 8 cruise missiles or bombs on individual stations arranged around its circumference. Think of it like a giant revolver. When the weapons officer commands a release, the drum rotates to bring the next weapon into the drop position, and the weapon falls away. Then the drum rotates again for the next one. This allows the B-52 to release its entire internal payload in rapid sequence without having to open and close the bomb bay doors between each drop, which saves time over the target and reduces the aircraft's exposure to ground fire. The ground crew tested the rotary launcher mechanism thoroughly, spinning it through its full rotation cycle, confirming that each of the 8 weapon stations locked properly and released on command, and verifying every electrical connection between the launcher and the aircraft's fire control system. A misfire or a hang, meaning a weapon that fails to release, is one of the most dangerous situations a bomber crew can face, so the ground checks are exhaustive. While all of this was happening on the flight line, the 5-man crew assigned to the mission was preparing in the crew room. A B-52 crew consists of the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, the radar navigator who also serves as the bombardier, and the electronic warfare officer. Each one has a specific job, and together they operate the aircraft as a single coordinated unit. The flight to the target area in Iran from RAF Fairford was estimated at approximately 4 hours and 30 minutes one way. That means the crew was looking at a minimum of 9 hours in the air just for the outbound and inbound legs, not counting time over the target or any delays. For a mission that long, preparation is everything. The pilots tested their oxygen masks in the crew room, checking the seal against their faces, testing the pressure regulator for proper airflow, and confirming the intercom connection so they could communicate clearly with the rest of the crew through the entire flight. They packed their personal flight bags with water, food, maps, checklists, emergency procedures, and anything else they might need during a mission that would stretch across most of a day. In the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot strapped into their side-by-side ejection seats on the upper deck and began running through the pre-flight checklist. This is a long and detailed process on the B-52 because the aircraft has so many systems that all have to work together. They entered the mission coordinates into the navigation system, programming the waypoints from Fairford to the target area in Iran and the return route. They checked every instrument on the panel: altimeters, airspeed indicators, engine gauges, fuel quantity readouts, communications radios on multiple frequencies, and the terrain-following radar that allows the aircraft to fly at low altitude by mapping the ground ahead and adjusting the flight path to avoid obstacles. Below the cockpit on the lower deck, 2 more crew members took their stations. The navigator sat on the right side, responsible for the aircraft's route, timing, and ensuring the bomber arrived at every waypoint and the target on schedule. In many ways, the navigator is the human GPS of the aircraft. He constantly cross-referenced the onboard navigation systems with his own calculations, monitored ground speed and wind drift, and relayed corrections to the pilots. Speed up here, slow down there, adjust heading 2 degrees left. His job was to make sure the aircraft was exactly where it needed to be at exactly the right time. Because in a coordinated strike, being 30 seconds late or a mile off course can mean the difference between hitting the target and missing it entirely. The radar navigator sat on the left side of the lower deck, and his role was arguably the most critical during the weapons delivery phase. He was the bombardier. He operated the offensive avionics system, which includes the radar, the targeting pods, the weapons management computer, and the delivery system controls. He worked across 4 screens simultaneously during the approach to the target, monitoring radar returns that painted the terrain and the target area ahead, tracking weapon status to confirm that each bomb and missile was armed and ready for release, verifying target coordinates against the mission plan, and calculating delivery parameters like release altitude, airspeed, and time to impact. When the moment came to drop weapons, he was the one who gave the command. Everything in the cockpit and on the lower deck checked out. The aircraft was fully loaded, all systems were operational, and the crew had reviewed the mission plan from start to finish. The order to depart was given, and the B-52 began its slow taxi from the ramp to the runway at RAF Fairford. These aircraft do not move quickly on the ground. They are enormous machines with long, flexible wings that dip and sway as the bomber rolls over uneven taxiway surfaces. The pilot lined up on the center line of the runway, confirmed with the tower, and pushed all 8 throttles forward to full power. The roar from those engines is something you feel in your chest before you hear it in your ears. The heavy bomber accelerated down the runway, consuming most of its length under the combined weight of a full bomb load and maximum fuel. The nose lifted, then the main gear left the ground, and the B-52 climbed into the sky heading southeast. 2 B-52s flew this mission together. That means 2 aircraft, 10 crew members total, and a combined weapons payload of approximately 140,000 pounds of high explosive heading directly toward Iran. They flew southeast across Europe, crossing over the English Channel, then over France and the Mediterranean Sea, maintaining their assigned altitude and course. The route was carefully planned to stay within approved airspace corridors, and to time the arrival over the target area precisely. As they approached Iranian airspace, the electronic warfare officer on each aircraft was monitoring his threat receivers constantly, watching for any sign of enemy radar tracking, missile guidance signals, or air defense activation. Iran had invested heavily in its integrated air defense network, including Russian-supplied systems, but by the time these bombers reached the target area, the situation on the ground had already changed dramatically. American and Allied operations in the preceding hours and days had systematically dismantled Iran's ability to contest its own airspace. The Iranian Navy was effectively destroyed. Surface combatants and fast attack craft that had threatened shipping in the Strait of Hormuz were sunk or disabled. The Iranian Air Force was grounded, its fighters either destroyed on the ground or unable to take off from damaged runways. The leadership command and control network had been disrupted by precision strikes on communication nodes and headquarters buildings. And the anti-aircraft defenses, the surface-to-air missile batteries and radar stations that were supposed to protect exactly the kind of targets these bombers were about to hit, were already knocked out. Every layer of Iran's military defense had been peeled away, and now the strategic bombers were coming in to finish the job on the missile positions that directly threatened the Strait of Hormuz and American forces in the region. When the 2 B-52s reached the target area, the radar navigator on the lower deck of each aircraft took control of the weapons delivery sequence. This is the moment everything builds toward. He confirmed the target coordinates on his screens one final time, cross-checking them against the mission data to make sure there was no error. He verified the weapon selection, ensuring the right munitions were cued for the right targets. Cruise missiles for the hardened bunkers that needed standoff precision, J-dams for the missile storage facilities, and Mark 84s for the open launch positions. Then he commanded the bomb bay doors to open. There is a distinct sound and vibration that runs through the aircraft when those doors swing apart, and every crew member knows what it means. The rotary launcher inside the bay began spinning, bringing each weapon into the release position one after another. Bombs and missiles dropped from the bay in rapid sequence, separating cleanly from the aircraft and falling toward the Iranian missile positions below. The radar navigator monitored each release on his screens, confirming that every weapon separated properly, tracking their trajectories, and watching for impact confirmation. The cruise missiles launched from the wing pylons fired their engines after release and streaked toward their assigned targets at low altitude, following their pre-programmed flight paths to the aim points. The entire weapons delivery sequence took only minutes, but in those minutes, thousands of pounds of precision-guided munitions struck Iranian military infrastructure with devastating effect. Missile storage bunkers collapsed, launch positions were cratered, support facilities and command posts were destroyed. The targets that had enabled Iran to threaten commercial shipping and military vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz were eliminated in a single coordinated strike. Once the full payload was expended, the bomb bay doors closed and the two B-52s banked away from the target area. The mission was not over, though. The crew still had hours of flying ahead of them. According to the mission plan, the bombers did not return directly to the United Kingdom. Instead, they flew to Sofia Airport in Bulgaria for a planned refueling stop. Now you might wonder why Bulgaria. The B-52 carries enough fuel in its internal tanks to make the round trip from Fairford to Iran and back without stopping. The range is there, but military planning does not work on minimums. You always build in margin. The Bulgaria stop served multiple purposes. It ensured the aircraft would land with comfortable fuel reserves even if they encountered headwinds, had to divert around weather, or needed to extend their time in the target area for any reason. It also provided operational flexibility, meaning if the mission parameters changed in flight or if the aircraft needed to be redirected to a second target set, they would not be constrained by fuel, and it gave the crews a chance to briefly reset during what was an extremely long and intense day of flying. The two bombers landed at Sofia, refueled, and then took off again for the final leg back to RAF Fairford. When they touched down in England, the drag parachutes deployed from the tail of each aircraft. The drag chute is a large parachute that billows out behind the bomber on landing, creating massive aerodynamic resistance that helps slow the aircraft on the runway. For a heavy aircraft like the B-52 landing with the residual weight of its airframe and remaining fuel, the drag chute is essential for shortening the rollout distance and reducing brake wear. The chutes deployed cleanly, the bombers decelerated and taxied back to the ramp, and the first strike mission was complete. But the operation was far from finished. Back in the United States, at one of the B-52 bases on American soil, another crew was already preparing to fly. The air campaign against Iranian missile positions was not a one-and-done strike. It was a sustained operation, and that meant more bombers had to be fed across the Atlantic to Fairford to keep the pressure on. This crew received a rapid mission briefing, reviewed the flight plan for the transatlantic crossing, checked weather along the route, and headed to their aircraft, which was already sitting on the ramp fully serviced, fueled, inspected, and loaded with the munitions it would carry on its first combat mission from the British base. They loaded their personal gear and flight bags into the aircraft. There were several bags because a transoceanic flight in a B-52 requires everything from survival equipment and mission publications to food and water for a crew that will be airborne for many hours. The bomber taxied out and took off, heading east over the Atlantic. The pilots settled into the rhythm of a long overwater crossing, monitoring their instruments, checking in with air traffic control centers as they passed from one sector to the next. Below them on the lower deck, the navigator tracked the aircraft's position across the featureless ocean, while the radar navigator monitored his screens for weather ahead, and the electronic warfare officer kept watch on the threat receivers. Even over friendly airspace thousands of miles from any combat zone, the EWO stays alert. That is standard operating procedure on every B-52 flight, because you never know when the tactical situation might change, and because maintaining discipline in peacetime is what makes you effective in combat. This particular crossing included one scheduled aerial refueling. Hours into the flight, a KC-135 Stratotanker appeared on the radar ahead, orbiting at the designated refueling track. The B-52 pilots made radio contact with the tanker crew and began the rendezvous procedure. Aerial refueling is one of the most demanding tasks in military aviation. The B-52 approached the tanker from below and behind, closing the distance slowly and carefully, while the boom operator on the tanker guided the refueling boom downward. The B-52 pilot had to hold his aircraft in a precise position relative to the tanker, maintaining exact speed, altitude, and lateral alignment, while the boom connected to the refueling receptacle on top of the bomber's fuselage just behind the cockpit. Any deviation, a gust of wind, a momentary lapse in concentration, and the boom disconnects or worse, causes a contact that could damage both aircraft. The connection was made. Fuel flowed from the tanker into the B-52's tanks, and the transfer took several minutes. When the tanks were full, the boom operator disconnected. The B-52 dropped back and descended away from the tanker, and the bomber continued on course toward England, topped off and ready for whatever came next. This is how the United States sustains long-range combat operations. It is not just about the bombers themselves. It is about the entire system. The tankers that extend their range, the forward bases that reduce transit time to the target area, the allied governments that grant basing rights, the intelligence networks that identify and validate the targets, the maintenance crews that keep the aircraft flying, and the logistics chain that moves fuel and weapons to where they need to be. When you watch a B-52 take off on a combat mission, you are not watching a single airplane go to war. You are watching the full weight of American military infrastructure in motion, and that infrastructure is unmatched by any other nation on Earth. The message being sent here is straightforward, and it is aimed directly at the leadership in Tehran. The Strait of Hormuz is going to remain open. The flow of global commerce through that waterway, which carries roughly 20% of the world's petroleum supply, is not going to be interrupted by Iranian missiles or naval threats. The United States has the capability and the willingness to eliminate any military asset that threatens that corridor, and it has now demonstrated that capability with decisive force. Iran's navy is gone. Its air force is grounded. Its air defenses have been dismantled. Its missile positions are craters. And the bombers that did this are already being reloaded for the next mission. That is the reality of American military power when it is fully committed to an objective. And there is something else that deserves attention here. Something that often gets lost when people focus on the explosions and the hardware. The coordination required to execute an operation like this is staggering. Think about what had to happen in sequence for those two B-52s to successfully strike their targets. First, intelligence agencies had to identify the exact locations of the Iranian missile positions, confirm that those locations were active, determine what kind of defenses surrounded them, and build a target package that matched the right weapon to each specific structure. Then planners at United States Strategic Command and Air Force Global Strike Command had to design the mission, calculating fuel loads, weapon configurations, flight routes, timing windows, refueling schedules, and contingency options for every possible scenario. Then diplomatic channels had to secure basing rights from the British government, landing rights from Bulgaria, and overflight clearances from every country along the route. Then the maintenance crews at Fairford had to prepare the aircraft to a combat-ready standard, which means not just routine servicing, but a full weapons load and combat systems check that takes hours of detailed work. Then the air crews had to be briefed, equipped, and ready to fly a 9-plus-hour mission that demanded peak concentration from takeoff to landing. And then all of that had to come together at one precise moment over a target area thousands of miles from home, with weapons releasing on schedule and hitting within meters of their aim points. That is not something you improvise. That is the product of decades of training, investment, doctrine development, and institutional knowledge. It is the reason the United States can project power to any point on the globe within hours, and it is the reason that no other military on Earth can replicate what happened in the skies over Iran. The B-52 itself is a testament to that institutional strength. An aircraft designed in the 1950s, continuously upgraded and modernized through 7 decades of service, still forming the backbone of America's strategic bomber fleet in the 21st century. The airframes flying today have been rewired, re-engined in terms of avionics, fitted with modern weapon systems, given new radar and communications suites, and structurally reinforced to keep flying for decades more. The Air Force plans to keep the B-52 in service until at least the 2050s, which would give some of these aircraft a service life of nearly 100 years. No other weapons platform in history has demonstrated that kind of longevity and adaptability, and the reason is simple. The basic design is so sound and so capable that it remains relevant no matter how much the world changes around it. What happened over Iran proves that beyond any doubt. A 70-year-old aircraft design carrying 21st-century precision weapons, flown by a crew trained to the highest standards in the world, launched from a forward base on Allied soil, refueled in the air by tanker aircraft, and delivering its payload with pinpoint accuracy against hardened military targets. That is not just a military operation. That is a demonstration of everything the United States Air Force represents, and it carries a message that extends far beyond the Persian Gulf. Every nation that has considered threatening American interests or the global commons, whether that means the Strait of Hormuz, the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, or any other critical waterway, has just received a very clear reminder of what happens when America decides to act. Right now, the objective could not be clearer. The Strait of Hormuz will stay open, and anyone who tries to close it will face the same fate as those missile positions in the Iranian desert.